There were approximately 125,000 Native Americans that lived on millions of acres of land throughout Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida at the beginning of the 1830s. By the end of this decade, this was changed drastically. The federal government, acting on behalf of white settlers who wanted to grow cotton on the Indians' land and had recently discovered gold, forced them to leave their homelands. The Indians had to walk thousands of miles to a designated Indian territory that was located across the Mississippi River. This journey became known as the Trail of Tears. White Americans often feared and resented the Native Americans. They believed that the American Indians were uncivilized and occupied land that white settlers rightfully owned. They believed they deserved this land. There were officials in the early years of the American Republic, such as President George Washington, who believed that the best way to solve the Indian problem was to civilize the Native Americans. This civilization would consist of trying to convert them to Christianity, to teach them to speak and read English, and to adopt European-style economic practices. The economic practices being those such as the individual ownership of property, of land and property. Many Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Creek, and Cherokee that lived in the southeastern United States embraced these customs. These tribes became known as the 5 civilized tribes. The Indian land was valuable, and as more settlers flooded the region, this land became even more coveted. The settlers did not care how civilized the Native Americans were. The settlers wanted the land and resorted to stealing their livestock, burning and looting the homes, and squatting in land that belonged to the Native Americans. The state governments joined with the settlers' efforts to drive the Native Americans out of the South. Andrew Jackson, as an army general, had spent years leading brutal attacks against the Creeks in Georgia and Alabama and the Seminoles in Florida. These brutal campaigns resulted in the transfer of thousands of acres of Indian land to white farmers. Jackson continued this campaign when he became president. He signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. This act gave the federal government the power to exchange Native American land located in the cotton region east of the Mississippi for lands to the west. Under the leadership of President Jackson, the government continued to force Native Americans to leave their lands. It was the winter of 1831 that the Choctaw became the first nation to be expelled from the land altogether. The Native Americans had to move to the Indian Territory, which was located in present-day Oklahoma, by foot. Without food, supplies, or other help from the government, thousands of Native Americans died along the way. It was noted as a trail of tears and death. The removal of the Native Americans continued, and in 1836, the federal government forced the Creeks from their land for the last time. This forceful removal of the Native Americans to Oklahoma resulted in 3,500 deaths of the 15,000 Creeks that set out for Oklahoma. The Cherokee people were divided as to what was the best way to handle the government's overtaking of their land. Some wanted to fight, and others were in agreement to leave in exchange for money and other concessions. In 1835, the Treaty of New Dakota was transferred into. This treaty traded all Cherokee land east of Mississippi for $5 million, which is considerably a small sum today. Assistance in relocation and compensation for lost property. In 1838, General Winfield Scott and 7,000 soldiers forced the remaining Cherokee more than 1,200 miles to the Indian Territory. More than 5,000 Cherokee died along the way from whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, and starvation. Tens of thousands of Native Americans have been driven off their lands in the southeastern United States by 1840. The federal government had promised that the Indian country would remain theirs. As the white settlers pushed westward, the Indian country shrank. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state, and the Indian Territory was gone forever.